Hello and welcome to Keeping It Real. I'm Joy and I'm your host, and I'm happy you can join me on this video presentation. I have some really exciting things I'm going to be sharing with you, some great images that are going to take us back to a time of biblical history and the biblical giants, the men of renown, the ancient giants, or as the Bible refers to them as the fallen angels. And to me, it's a piece of missing history that parallels our Bible and what Scripture tells us. I feel that a lot of the Scriptures, our Bible, the Holy Bible, has been cherry picked, and there are books, as we know, that are scattered around, such as the Book of Jubilees and Enoch and others that get into more detail about these fallen giants and or fallen angels. And history has unveiled a lot that will parallel what the Scriptures talk about when they discuss the fallen angels. Just in the brief narrative that's given, it does say that these giants came here and had relations with human women. Now, the story that I'm going to be focusing on is one that comes from ancient Mesopotamia, which is, I'm going to show you a map here, which is in the 3rd millennium BC, which basically that goes back 2500 BC and goes back to 2500 BC, which is 2500 years before Christ. And it's a time when there were giants here on the earth, and they were fallen angels that arrived on a mountain peak, as the Bible describes, Mount Hermon. And there is also a hidden history that had been uncovered by archaeologists back in the late 30s and 40s. Later, it was some of the discoveries that were made, which again were in this part of Mesopotamia, as it's referred to, which they uncovered a lot of tablets, clay tablets, structures, reliefs. I mean, just so many things. And this part of the Mesopotamia is now the Middle East, which is Iran, Iraq, in those areas, and also referred to back in 2500 BC as Sumer. But during the time that archaeologists were working in these regions, they were free to do that, but there was still a lot more, and is a lot more that needs to be uncovered there. But they were able to uncover, and now is in museums, these tablets, these clay tablets that were over 2500, actually going back 5,000 years is what it totals in our time today, if we're comparing that. So over 5,000 years ago, we have a region called Mesopotamia, which means the land between the two rivers, which is obviously the Tigris and the Euphrates. And in the Bible, the record tells us that Mesopotamia was a city of Ner, which was, in Genesis, it tells us that was Abraham's brother, and now is the land of Canaan. So that comes later. So prior to that, the Sumerian people, which I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to take us back to this picture here, and I'm going to just kind of share with you some of these reliefs and tablets that were discovered and later uncovered. And the tablets were deciphered, it's been probably 20 years now, and where they were able to figure out the alphabet because no one was able to decipher these clay tablets for a very long time. But it was an entire library that had been obviously covered by a cataclysm that happened back during that time frame, which I believe was probably a polar reversal. And I'm not alone in that theory, because we know that our Earth goes through cyclical cycles of catastrophes. One, which is our polar magnetic poles do flip. We also know that there are solar outbursts from our sun, which are on a cyclical basis, and you can refer to those as micronovas. And I have studied this in great detail for the past 5 years, so I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about here, and it also parallels with what the Bible tells us about these cataclysms. Getting back to the tablets, now the tablets and the Sumerian culture, which are the people that lived during this time period, and they are the ones that obviously talk about these fallen angels that are in our scriptures, and in particularly in Genesis, but in the book of Jubilees and also in Enoch talks about these fallen angels. Now, the history tells us that they were called the Annunaki, which is what the Sumerian people referred to them as. And they looked at them as gods. And they obviously came from an outer solar system. And they lived a lot longer than what we lived during that time period, which our lives going back that far was anywhere from 500 to 1500 years, as the Bible tells us, because Noah, we know, lived a long time, over 800 years, and it gives us a list in the lifespans in the Old Testament. But this particular image here talks about the King's List, which is the Anunnaki's reign during their time here on this planet. And it gives a lifespan of 3,000 years, which is what their lifespans were. And according to the narrative that's given and from the Sumerian on the clay tablets that were discovered, is that they came from a planet outside our solar system, and it had its own sun, which was probably our sun's binary twin sun, which all suns we know have a binary out there. Most of them do, that they've discovered, scientists have discovered. So they came here obviously mining for gold, and they brought with them, which I'm going to go back to this little statue here, which is an image of a statue that was also uncovered in the region in Mesopotamia, which like I said, is in this area here by the Euphrates and Tigris River, which is now Iran, Iraq regions. And they referred to these as EGG. And apparently the Anunnaki probably brought them from another planetary system, because it says that they came with them, and as the story is told, and they used them as slaves. And they did look a little strange, like lizard people, and there's some more figurines here I'm going to be showing you that depicts them a little better. And as you can tell, they do look like lizard people, and they even have little fangs. And these are females, they have breast, and they obviously breastfed their children, because we have one of the images depicting that. But what is really ironic is we also have other, like the Anastasies that were in Arizona, that were a missing tribe. They just kind of like disappeared some years ago. But they also depicted paintings and reliefs of these ant people that looked very similar to these lizard people that we also know that there are people who claim to have been abducted or seen a flying UFO, and they've seen these lizard-looking or praying mantis type beings. How true that is, I don't know. But obviously, there was some truth, according to her history, with these beings being here on this planet that look like this. And these are just a few of the reliefs. And Irudu is also means Sumerian in Genesis. And we also have Sura, which is Noah. They referred to as Noah on this clay tablet, written in 2150 BC. So that was like 5,200 years ago. And they talk about the flood, the Great Flood. Now, obviously, these tablets were telling the story before the narrative given in the Bible of Noah's flood. So this is probably where the story originated from. And to me, I'm not sure exactly why the churches, I'm a Christian, I've been a Christian for 25 years, and I've never, in the history that has been given to me, was I told about these histories here that I'm sharing with you, which is why I'm doing these videos, because I think that this is so crucial to our biblical history and parallels what the Bible is telling us. And if anything, it should build your faith, not take it away. But again, we have so much that has been hidden from us in our history, as I've mentioned, even with the cathedrals on the presentation I did there, that is, hidden. And God is bringing all of this to light. And our conscience is even being opened up to these truths, which is the Spirit of God moving. And, why these things were hidden, I really can't answer that. And I don't think we may never really know, other than what the Bible tells us, that, there is an evil here. And we see it even today. And it's, rulers of darkness and principalities, the Bible says, which is what we have today. We have our physical form being, and we have our spiritual. Just like back, if you look at the narrative given of the fallen angels, obviously they came here in a physical form. And many times angels did show up that way. They weren't always bad angels. Obviously, there's good angels that can also appear in a physical form, as they did in Lot's time when that catastrophe happened, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he was led out of the city by two men who were angels, as the Bible referred to them. And it said that they were tall and beautiful in stature. And we know that the further we go back, the bigger, taller these, not just the Anunnakis, but also human beings were also very tall in stature. And as we get closer to the 15th century and a little bit later up until the 18th century, we still see a lot of remnants of these giants. And we don't see so much of it anymore, although there are a few basketball players and others that we see that have these super sizes, but not anywhere as near as tall as what they were going back in time. And the further back in time, the taller they were. And I'm going to be showing you some more images of just how tall these people were. And a lot of them were referred to as the Tartarian people. And again, that is another part of history that has been hidden from us. And we have their maps, we have their architect, even a lot of it today here in America. And the cathedrals I shared with you on one of my videos actually showed a lot of that architect that still exists today. And that's also around the world. And you see it with many of the Gothic churches, cathedrals, that they were able to give a different narrative for and claim it as, own it as people that migrated here and settlers that were in horse and buggy, that they built it with their horse and buggy, which we know is just a big lie, as many of the lies that have been told throughout history. But we're getting to the truth, aren't we? And that's what we're going to focus on. This image here is showing some more of the remnants of some of the structures that were built by the Sumerian people and later covered, because obviously a catastrophe must have taken place, probably the polar shift, and a lot of mud and dirt and water covered these areas. And that's why they were buried. And, some of the reliefs, even on the tablets, they were broken, but they were still all in the same area. So they were able to keep everything intact and, puzzle the pieces together that were broken. But they were very meticulous in the way they kept their library and their records, and they were very cultured people. Obviously, they learned a lot from the Anunnakis. They learned how to farm. They learned agriculture, music, makeup even, which the Bible tells us, that was an evil that was taught by the fallen angels. Sorcery and other things as well, probably because they, taught them about the planets and all that, which I'm going to talk about. But here's some more of their reliefs that are in a lot of museums around the world. A lot in Europe. This one is in Germany. And the wall reliefs were actually taken from the structures, and they were still intact, many of them, that depict the Anunnaki, which is also one standing here in the center. And this is really interesting. This is actually a map, a star map. And it was drawn, and I'm going to show you the clay circular tablet that depicts this image here, which is a star map that was drawn by the Anunnaki of the solar system as they were coming through into our solar system. And it also is depicting all of our planets and the outer parts of the solar system, which even with Jupiter, that wasn't even discovered until the 70s. And here we have the people going back in time 5,000 some years that obviously are depicting these planets, all of them. Not just the sun and the moon and what they could visually see, but those even beyond, which they would have not had any knowledge of unless it was either given to them or there was someone there that obviously had mastered flight through the solar system, which was the Anunnaki. And again, this is another relief of them. And again, I'll leave a link at the bottom of the channel so that you can, or the video, so that you can go and reference and see some of these and a lot more of the statues and reliefs that were uncovered over in that area that are in the museums. And this little statue is of the Sumerian people, probably a husband and wife. And they're usually shown, in a really civilized manner, very, with good mannerisms and with their hands folded. Their eyes are always kind of a little strange and a little buggy, but, I don't know if that was really, if their eyes were just really large, or if they just depicted themselves that way. We just don't know. Here is another artifact that was uncovered, and it's magnificent. It gives a lot of detail here. You could see the muscular structure of these Anunnaki, and it appeared that they had an African features to them, because the noses are wide. They appear to have the really, curly, kind of kinky afro type hair, but it's longer, and so are their beards. But they're very muscular. This one here is obviously holding a goat, but it's a full grown goat, and whoever made this particular relief, and all these have been carbon dated, so we know that they go back to that time frame where the Anunnaki would have still been here on this planet. But they wanted to depict them as they were, and their size particularly is why they would be shown a lot of times holding lions or different animals, or standing next to humans sometimes that were a lot smaller, and you could see just how big they really are. And again, here they're probably being taught how to make clothing, wool, and looks like there's an Anunnaki seated there, and you see the comparison in the size of the humans there. Probably the Sumerian people, which I believe were a little smaller in stature than what a little bit later humans, I think, were a lot taller, because the Bible talks about, that a little bit, but, not just their lifespans. And there's been a lot of skeletal remains and things that have been in Earth that show us that, the further you go back, the people were much, much taller. And this is another photo of Mesopotamia. Now, I'm going to go into the images here of more of the Anunnakis that, again, this one's holding a lion. And you could just kind of see the reference on the right side of a man standing next to a lion, and, the size difference, which is kind of crazy. Now, these are the Tartarian people, or Tarta, which we've discovered is a stolen history. And there's a lot to be said there, that the Russians hid a lot of the history of the Tartarian people, who were, most of them, very tall. And we still see a lot of the remnants of the giants that were still obviously living on the earth. Maybe not the size of the Anunnaki, but obviously they were still very tall. And I'll talk more on the Tartarian history in another video, but I just want to hit home on this because I want to just share with you that it would not be uncommon for a giant like an Anunnaki to have sexual relations with a human woman, because the women, like the men here, were also very tall in stature. Yes, probably not as tall and muscular as the Anunnaki, but still large enough where they could have a sexual relation with them and bear children, which the Bible talks about. And those would be the men of renown, their offspring, which were very strange and very evil and very large in stature. And the Bible has a lot to say about that and why they were wiped out. And here is, we know in the 17th, 18th century, we also have newspaper clippings. Obviously, there was photos, so this would have been in the later part of the 18th century. You have a giant skeletal remain here that was discovered. You could also go and look at some of the Anunnaki, or the South American skeletal remains, a lot of the skulls, which depict a lot of the larger cone-shaped skulls that are genetically, they're all, their DNA has been discovered going back to the Middle East, because Brian Forrester and some others who had studied this phenomena and discovered a lot of these cone-shaped giant skulls had the DNA tested, and they do know that it was a specific race of people that were, probably migrating from the Middle East and ended up in the South America along the peninsula there, and on the Paracas, they refer to as the Paracas people, but on that coastline. And that's where they found a majority of those skulls. But they are all over the planet, remnants of them. And here is another Tartarian. Some of them Asian looking, some of them colored. But standing next to a man here, you can see the size. And he's just not 8 or 9 foot. He's more probably like 12 foot. And some more. And I do want to go back while I'm thinking about it to these photos here, the cone-shaped skulls. Now, this particular statue was also uncovered in Sumer in the Middle East, and it is showing a person here that could have been genetically modified, because we know the Anunnakis were also messing with DNA. They had that ability. They were very advanced, which again would not be far-fetched, because if you look at what we're doing today, the scientists and people that are doing the egg splicing and in vitro and those kind of things that are very common now, they could even let you pick the sex of your child, eye color, they could do so many things, and even with the animals, they're doing some very weird things, we know. So it wouldn't be that far-fetched for them to be messing with the DNA, which is what the Sumerian people wrote about on some of the clay tablets, that they were in fact doing that. And I think some of the stories that we always considered myth, like the half horse, half man, there's others, that were half animal and half human, that we always considered that. But now I think those probably were in truth, and they were probably messing with DNA and creating these creatures and beasts. And later we could see why God destroyed the earth, and why these floods came and destroyed a lot of these creatures and giants that were the offspring of the Anunnaki and the humans. So again, this is another statue of one of the Ijiji that, again, you could see a little bit more detail. She's nursing a baby, one of her own, obviously. And again, they were used as slaves, and they were brought here as the story is told to us, which is really strange. But we also see these paintings around the world, and like I said, with the Anasazi, you see a lot of paintings over there in that region where they were living in caves on the sides of mountains. And they referred to them as ant people, and some of the other tribes as well that go back a little bit in time, but not that far back as the Ijiji. But obviously the stories were passed on, and they did talk about them bringing, before a catastrophe came, bringing them underground, and they depicted them as some lizard and some as ant people, and drew antennas on them, little where they look like little ants, but to me, they looked more like this here statue that we're looking at in this image. And this is in a museum somewhere. I'm not sure exactly what museum that's in, but there's quite a few of those little statuettes that are kind of strewn around in different museums that you can go research if you would like. And this looks like a copper statue that was also unearthed, and again depicting an Annunaki holding a lion, just for size. And this is a Sumerian woman, and you could see by the headpiece there that, they were cultured. And again, the eyes, I know, look a little buggy there, but why they always depicted themselves with the larger eyes, I really can't say, and I don't think anybody else really has answered that question. But, maybe their eyes were a little bigger, or they just depicted themselves that way. And this particular one, now, again, we have the skulls, and either these beings here were brought from another solar system, another planet, with the Anunnaki when they came, or they created them here and used them as slaves. But you could see that they have that cone shape and very large skull. And the real skulls, like I said, are in some of the museums over in South America and Machu Picchu and the Paracas museums. They have a majority of them there, and they're really something to see, I'll tell you that. This is one of the archaeologists, and he's also a scientist who studied the language, and many languages, but in particular the Sumerian language, and was able to help decipher a lot of the tablets that they had unearthed. So going back here to the giants, let's go ahead and look at some more images here. And as we know, we've even in our lifetime, we've had, some fairly good size giants that, did a lot of them were used as athletes, boxing, running, basketball. Andre the Giant, remember him? He goes back a little bit further, but I think in the 60s, as a boxer, and he was pretty massive. And here it looks like we have some 12 footers. And this isn't a photoshopped picture. I try to get real images that are not photoshopped. I know there's a lot of Photoshop stuff floating around on the internet, and on YouTube too. But I don't think I would like to waste your time or mine in putting such falsity up on a video presentation, and putting the time that I'm putting in to making you aware of some of our ancient history and past. So anyway, getting back to the image you're looking at, you could see there's a giant there that they had uncovered. And the Smithsonian at one time had a lot of, because as the people were settling here in America, they were obviously digging and, building, their little cabins and everything. Well, as life goes on, the skeletal remains were being uncovered, and a lot of times they didn't know what to do, so they would send them to, the museums. And Smithsonian had a good portion of these skeletal remains, which even up until the 60s had them on display, and then all of a sudden they suddenly disappeared, like many of the other large giant skeletal remains that have been uncovered around the world. Over in Europe, there's so much there to look at, that referring to these giants, that I just don't know why it's still being hidden from us. It just doesn't make sense. again, we have another one, an Asian Tartarian man. And this one is African, 6'8" is what it says here. And this one's pretty interesting because we have a woman and her husband. You kind of wonder how they have sexual relations, but obviously they must. So you see, it wouldn't be really that far-fetched for an Annunaki giant to have relations, like the Bible tells us, with human women, which they found very attractive. And this woman here, you see her hand on his shoulder. Look how huge her hand is. It's just crazy to think that people were that large in stature, just actually not that far back in time, because we're looking at the later part of the 1800s here, because that's when they had photography. And so just, wow, just really something. And you see this one here, and you see the man standing next to him, but look at the doorway. So you see the buildings were all built around people that were of giant stature, because look at the doorway. This is very common with a lot of the okay, sorry about that. I almost lost you. Okay, so, but with the buildings, I was going to bring up another photo slide of a lot of the structures that have these huge doors. And just let me get that pulled up here for you. Okay, here we go. All right, so like I was saying, with the large structures, which a lot of them have been demolished, repurposed, but we find with a lot of the cathedrals that are still standing, some of them still have the doors left on, and as they were when they were inherited by the inheritors, as we call them, which are people that obviously came later and claimed these structures as their own, and built them with a horse and buggy, by the way. And why they would build and need doors of this size, I don't know. I can't answer that. But I can tell you they were probably built for the people of this time, is more probably the truth. And here we have a man from Japan who was a giant. And there is a video out on the internet, and you can look up giant man from Japan, and you can watch the clip. And it is really, really interesting, to say the least, because this wasn't photoshopped. And you can tell by the way he moves, you can tell by the way the people are looking up at him. He goes and he stands behind the crowds of people cheering him. And looking at the people here, you know, they're not that much smaller than this man. He's just bulkier. But the height is clearly something that we see. And, you know, he may be obviously a little taller than this man, but he was probably a sumo. That's probably when they did sumo wrestling. That's probably where it originated, you know. He appears to have the diaper on there. So anyway, you can go find that. I'll probably put a link on, and you can go watch that from the link. But again, we're looking here at more giants, husband and wife. And again, you know, this wasn't a problem with DNA as we've been told, you know, that, you know, yeah, there was people that had, you know, yeah, there are some that had a growth hormone that, you know, made them oversized. But that's not what we're looking at, and that's not what we're talking about, because this was more widespread than just one out of a million might inherit a gene that has an overgrowth hormone or something where they keep growing and growing, and eventually they pass away. And that's different than what we're talking about here. We're talking about common people that were giant sized people, not quite as giant as the Anunnakis, but still these are the remnants of them. Again, and they come in all sizes and obviously colors, nationalities all around the world. Again, it looks like a 12, 13 footer. This is really interesting because this here is depicting a crown that I wish I could find the video for you. There's a video clip, and we have some archaeologists who apparently uncovered this over near Mesopotamia, is what we'll call it, in the Middle East. Okay, wasn't Mesopotamia during the time they uncovered it, but going back during the time of the Anunnakis, it would have been. And we do have the king's list, and they did have a kingship, so we know that this is where kingships come in. And even today we still have them. If we look at what we have with the king and queen of Europe, and their lineage, and going back, you could trace it all the way back to the Anunnakis, because that's where it came from. And even the Egyptian people use that same kingship and pass that on through the generations. So, and it's just something that was inherited from them, just like other things, women wearing makeup, for instance, mathematics, which we still use a lot of the mathematics that were used back during the Sumerian time where it originated, believe it or not. Long story there, but just too detailed to get into during this particular video. So I'll show you a few more structures here, and then I'm going to close. But these are, just to let you know, these are some towering, huge, megalithic columns that are over in Rome. But there's a lot of structures in that part of the earth that they say that the Romans constructed. And again, these were here way before the Romans. And the Romans would not have built structures this big. And look at the people in comparison. The Romans probably were not that much bigger than, yes, they were probably taller, but and a little more masculine, but certainly some of the structures that we see do not fit in with that narrative that's been given to us. And we also find some of these structures here, actually quite a few, that have also been either repurposed or hidden. And actually over in Mississippi, by the river, the Mississippi River, there are some giant columns. There was a huge palace there with columns just like this that are still standing. I don't know if they were taken down by a catastrophe during one of our polar reversals, one of our past cataclysms that we've had. But we do know that these cataclysms happen through time. Structures do get destroyed, but we also know that man has also destroyed a lot of these structures. And whoever is sitting in these high places, that's been keeping a lot of our history from us, such as the Vikings were here way before Christopher Columbus. And this was actually a Viking ship that was uncovered here in America back in the 1800s. I think 1820 is when this one was uncovered, along with some others, which I'll show you. So there's just so much that's been hidden from us that it's, that's why God's bringing everything to light, because The time is now, and people are waking up to these truths. Same with the cycles that we go through. And, we have our spiritual and we have our physical. And part of this is a physical destruction that happens. You could see in this image in the background, you see even with the column that the man's standing next to, which is just a small piece of the column, that's megalithic, probably weighs, 50 tons, who knows. But you see the blackening there. That's from a solar outburst. A solar flare, I don't think would have caused the destruction, but certainly a micronova would have. And I have done extensive research, which I will share in another video, of these cynical catastrophes, including the deluges that have happened not just in Noah's day, but even before that and even after that. Because when these magnetic poles flip, a lot of things happen, and that water comes rushing over the continents. And that's why a lot of even the megalithic structures in South America, when those were unearthed, these were all massive, and they were just strewn around like tinker toys that were strewn around and covered in mud and later hardened, and buried in the ground very deep. But they also had fossils in them from the sea. And you find shells and all kinds of remnants from the ocean where those were covered under water at one time. So that whole continent had been covered, as well as other continents. Look at the Grand Canyon. I wouldn't have believed it unless I seen it myself. And that thing is massive. Getting back to the Viking ship, again, these are in some of the museums here in America and unearthed in America, among other artifacts that we can clearly see that truth has been kept from us, okay? But the big lie isn't what we've been told in our what we've been told in our history books about the Christopher Columbus being the first person to discover America. That is just a flat out lie, and I get angry even thinking about it, because there's no need. What are they hiding? Why tear down beautiful structures that we cannot replicate today? And I showed you some of those structures with those cathedrals. Thank God some of those are still standing. And the only reason they are is because they've been repurposed, and they could come up with a narrative that is believable, that, these were built, for religious purposes. And that's why you see a lot of them with crosses and statues and reliefs that depict religion all around the world. But if you look at the structure, you see something else. And we believe that those were used as some kind of energy device, because you're seeing these windows that and other antiquitects that are on them that Tesla was using, and shapes and so forth that were creating magnetic energy, and probably electricity and heating and other things that they probably used. That obviously, money probably later came into play when people started settling here and are coming out of their little caves, probably after a catastrophe, and saw where they could make some money. I mean, there's so much history there. We even had electric cars, and they weren't running on batteries, okay? It's crazy, but true. And further on later, I will be sharing a lot of good images with you to further prove these truths and to show you how much has been kept from all of us. These are in Egypt. This goes to show you, you see the people standing in the middle of these two columns, and we know how massive the pyramids are. And the Egyptians did not build the pyramids, and that is clear. And by their structures, they inherited this, just like the people that were settling here. They knew how to build log cabins and all that, and that's probably more what they could do with a horse and buggy, where the Egyptians just kind of, they did a lot of hieroglyphs and other things to, claim the structures that clearly were already there and were used by a previous civilization. So over and over again, this is what we see throughout history, these structures being used again and again, reclaimed, repurposed. Some of them still standing, the ones they can't tear down and hide from us, but obviously there's still a lot of remnants for us to see, including these Viking ships that are in the museums. So, discovered in America. So, we know the truth. And the truth will set you free. Yes, indeed. So, thank you. God bless. If you like the video, please like it and subscribe, because then you'll be notified when I release my next video, which will be a week from today. Thank you. Good night.